In 1996, Six Flags announced 3 Premier Rides launch coasters for their parks. One of them was Batman and Robin the Chiller at New Jersey's Six Flags Great Adventure. This one specifically would be 2 LAM shuttle loops that would race each other. Unfortunately, the Chiller was extremely unreliable from its LAMs and would close quite frequently, so much so that the Chiller was removed a decade after it opened. Why did the Chiller close just 10 years after it opened? This is why Batman and Robin the Chiller was a total failure. Six Flags is one of the most prominent theme park chains. They are home to some of the biggest theme parks in America. However, they gained most of their parks through acquisitions. One of them came in 1977 with Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey. This was a zoo hybrid park an hour south of New York City. Six Flags would attempt to add large investments into the park. However, the park's luck would go worse than your toilet after 12 rounds of Taco Bell thanks to 2 accidents in the 1980s. The first and more disastrous accident was the infamous Haunted Castle fire. In 1984, a fire erupted inside the building and consumed the attraction. Unfortunately, 8 teenagers were trapped inside the castle and were killed. The rumored cause was that the fire came from a cigarette, combined with a lack of safety precautions due to it being a temporary structure. See? This is what happens when you smoke that Benjamin in places you really shouldn't be doing it in. After this incident, new fire safety laws were passed for amusement park funhouses and dark rides. This accident created a bad reputation for Six Flags Great Adventure, and attendance started to plummet faster than your wallet's value when you keep smoking that jewel. Seriously, you really gotta stop hitting the vape if you don't want popcorn lungs. Six Flags would attempt to regain the guests' trust back. But 3 years later, another tragedy occurred on their arrow-launched loop, Lightning Loops. In 1987, a teenage girl tragically fell to her death when she tried to enter the train after it was already dispatched. This led to the girl being ejected from the train, leading to her death. This crashed Great Adventure's reputation so much that the park was perceived as dangerous. The attendance was so low that rumors erupted about the park's closing. To save Great Adventure, Six Flags ordered an aerodynamics mega looper called Great American Scream Machine. This aero creation was a massive 7 inversion machine that tied the record for the most inversions at the time. This coaster alone boosted attendance so much that crowds were storming Great Adventure like Nick Fiends the moment they realized they left their vape in your house. Where the fuck is my vape? What the hell, man? How did you even get into my house? You don't even have a fucking key. It doesn't matter, man. I need my nicotine fix. Dude, you have a problem. You need to go to a rehab center. Now, the Scream Machine was very painful. In fact, the ride no longer exists. They tore that bitch down in 2010. But back then, Scream Machine was one of a kind that drew people in. This boost in confidence led Great Adventure to a multi-round of new coaster additions. But it's important to note that not every coaster they added was a successful round. In fact, one addition in 1997 was extremely problematic. Meanwhile, Great Adventure's sister park, Six Flags Over Texas, was looking for a new indoor family coaster. This family coaster would be identical to the Windstorm coasters made by Italian manufacturers. However, instead of getting a cheap Windstorm from them, they approached Maryland-based Premier Rides. Founded a year prior by Jim Shea, this up-and-coming manufacturer was trying to get their foot off the ground with magnets. But they needed to start a little bit small, so Six Flags got Premier Rides to build Runaway Mountain. This Premier family coaster has a Windstorm layout, but is better built, resulting in a high-quality one. This is good, because the last thing we need is shitty quality control that recreates getting beat up in a dark alleyway. Over Texas got a good family coaster, but around the same time Runaway Mountain opened, Premier would wow the industry with Outer Limits Flight of Fear at both Kings Island and Kings Dominion. This was the prototype LAM launch coaster from Premier. This was influential because these were the first coasters to use a magnetic launch. The layout would consist of the LAM launch and a spaghetti bowl layout filled with twists, turns, and 4 inversions. And with Flight of Fear specifically, it would be plussed with theming and be placed in a dark building, making it wilder. Now, Flight of Fear was delayed a couple of months due to technical issues from the LAMs. Makes sense. It's a prototype, so they gotta work out the kinks. But the ride would be a major hit. Six Flags saw Flight of Fear and immediately jumped on the bandwagon for the LAM launches. They contacted Premier again for their shuttle loop variants themed to Batman. Unfortunately, all of them would be problematic. In 1996, Warner Brothers was preparing to release the movie Batman and Robin, the second film with George Clooney as Batman. To rein in some extra dough, Six Flags announced 3 Premier Rides LAM shuttle loops to tie them to the film. These these would be Mr. Freeze at both Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags St. Louis, and the focus of today's episode, Batman and Robin the Chiller at Great Adventure. This premier creation would be a shuttle variant of their LIM coasters. LIM stands for Linear Induction Motors. How the LIM system works is that they use large magnets to create electro waves. These waves produce enough power to send metal fins on the train into the course. The Chiller specifically would be a dueling coaster, meaning two separate tracks run alongside each other. This is due to Six Flags wanting extra capacity for this coaster at a park that now sees higher attendance than either over Texas or St. Louis. For both sides, the ride begins with an LIM launch at 65 miles per hour or 104 kilometers per hour. Depending on which track you rode, this launches you into one of two inverting elements. The Batman side traverses up into a tall inverting top hat, meaning you're forcefully being hung upside down. Meanwhile, the Robin track traverses a massive cobra roll with plenty of whip. Then both tracks rise up to traverse a whippy 0G roll. Then you hit a 200-foot, 61-meter slanted spike and hit another set of LIM launches. Once you run out of speed, you roll backwards and then hit the LIMs to traverse the layout again backwards into the station. This completes 1,137 feet, 346 meters of track for Batman, and 1,229 feet, 374 meters of track for Robin. Then the queue line and station would be themed to Mr. Freeze's generator, while the middle of the launch track features a set piece of the Gotham Observatory. While the layout was indeed short, the ride experience would pack an intense punch. Unfortunately, the ride would go more south than the tornado that stole your house. The Chiller opened on June 7th, 1997 to a grand celebration. To celebrate its opening, the park had a unique ribbon cutting ceremony. In honor of the dynamic duo and the dueling nature, the park had sets of twins come out to cut the ribbon and take the initial ride. On the surface, the ride would be a smash hit with guests getting to race each other and be a great addition to Great Adventure's lineup. However, the Chiller would see more problems than your house after the hurricane hit. Shortly after the ride opened, it would face constant technical and mechanical issues that forced it to stay closed. How bad was it? The Chiller closed days later for the rest of 1997. What the fuck? How? What? How does that even happen? The main issue centers around the dual LIM launches. Magnetic launches require no moving parts and can precisely control the speed, so they're much more reliable than a hydraulic or flywheel launch. However, not too many LIM launches have been used due to the insane amount of power it uses to operate it. The LIMs require 2.4 megawatts of power for each launch. That might not sound like much until you do the conversion rate and realize that amounts to 2,400 kilowatts or 2.4 million watts! What the fuck? How does he use that much? For reference, it takes about 1.8 kilowatts just to charge a car battery. For just one train to launch, it can charge about 1,400 car batteries. And keep in mind, the Chiller has two tracks, so you need to double the number I just presented. If both tracks were to launch at the same time, the ride would most likely cause a power outage. This would result in brownouts not only in the park, but in nearby neighborhoods as well. That is just insane to think about, because that's the roller coaster equivalent to using every electrical device you have connected to just two outlets. Ah, shit! Because of this, the coaster couldn't launch both tracks at the same time. This eliminated the racing element as the power draw made it near impossible to do so. Operators reportedly had to wait for the first track to clear the launch before launching the second one. This led to erratic and uneven operations that took away from the ride's dueling nature. And sometimes, the ride wouldn't even duel at all, as only one side would operate at a time. I just have to question how this electricity wasn't taken into consideration when planning it. That's like being assigned to do something at work, but you end up smoking pot on the job, and you end up getting caught lacking in the process as well. Even without launching in unison, the launches were still problematic. The LIMs sometimes had problems overheating and would even smoke up every now and then. Well, that's kind of ironic given the Mr. Freeze theme. Sounds a lot like your horrible cooking skills when you have no father. Six Flags could not provide the full thrust necessary to operate the ride consistently at high speeds. This led to the Chiller's biggest problem, valleying. Valleying occurs when the train gets stuck at a low point of track and is unable to rescue itself. This would occur a lot from power outages and cold weather. What compounds the issue even more is a design flaw. The second set of LIMs were placed at the top of the spike instead of the bottom. This means the train has no way to rescue itself if the magnets don't engage. Heck, in some extreme cases, the train would get stuck in the inversions. If the train gets stuck, they would have to use a crane to take it off the track. This alone takes days to get done. All these issues resulted in the Chiller closing days later for the rest of the year. Needless to say, Six Flags was rather mad at the situation. Not only is their new attraction not functional, but it couldn't even do like intended. These issues, along with similar issues with the Mr. Freeze clones at the other parks, caused the planned one for Six Flags Great America to get cancelled. Honestly, I don't blame them, because I would have reacted the same way. Just imagine you bought an expensive car, only for it to run like a piece of shit. That's essentially what trying to run this coaster is. A piece of shit. And you have to feel extra bad for Great Adventure. 2 years prior, they opened Viper on the other side of the park. This was a Togo looping coaster that, like the Chiller, was extremely problematic. The ride experience had a lot of headbanging and rode like a school bus on an extremely crappy road. And Viper constantly had technical issues that kept it closed most of the time. This coaster didn't even last a whole decade before getting the boot. As for the Chiller, the park was persistent on a spring 1998 opening and hoped it would have a consistent run. While it was more reliable that year, the Chiller was still a massive headache for the park. During its run at the park, the coaster faced long stretches of extended downtime as the launch mechanics were repaired and replaced. Great Adventure was in a bit of a conundrum when it came to maintaining the Chiller. Because there were 2 tracks, it meant there were double the amount of LIMs to maintain. There was a total of 432 LIM boxes that needed to have constant checks. What ended up happening is that one side would be closed so that parts could be donated to the other side. More often than not, the Batman side was closed as the parts donor for the Robin side. This is because Robin had less of a chance of validating than the Batman side. As spare parts became scarce, the Robin spike only had 3 pairs of LIMs as the train didn't need to launch as high to complete the circuit. Meanwhile, the Batman spike still had 7 pairs of LIMs that needed more speed to complete its circuit. This made Batman a rare credit as the track was closed for an entire season while only being open for 2 to 3 weeks in other seasons. If you got to ride it, you felt extremely lucky and felt like you just escaped Diddy's house. As if that wasn't bad enough, like Viper, people constantly complained about headbanging. Now, if you've ridden any Premier coasters, yes, even the ones with comfort collars, you know those coasters are smooth as butter. But before 2002, most Premier coasters featured over-the-shoulder restraints. Well, except for the Big Apple coasters, but we don't talk about that. And Goliath too, we also don't talk about that. These restraints killed the rides as the whippy transitions would slam riders' heads into the restraints. If you wore earrings, the restraints would result in bloody ears. As a result, guests were advised to remove their earrings before riding. Now I'm kind of curious what would damage your ears more, this or that new KSI song that sounds like 2 turds smashed together. As you can imagine, riding and maintaining the Chiller was one massive headache. The coaster would constantly be closed for days or weeks on end. It was frustrating as guests couldn't ride it, and even if they did, caused headbanging. Attempting to ride it is the equivalent of riding out a Cat 5 hurricane only to find out another hurricane is smacking your house a week later. Six Flags understandably wanted to improve the ride's reliability, so here's what they did. Addressing the headbanging, they first attempted to place more padding on the train, but they eventually replaced the over-the-shoulder restraints with lap bars on the Robin side in 2001, and later the Batman side in 2002. This is a nice and welcome change as the lap bars are more free and open. Then in 2004, some of the LIMs were taken off the spike to reduce maintenance costs. Then in 2005, the Chiller received upgrades. The interior was repainted red and the Batman side was repainted dark blue. The Robin side, however, was still original. However, the Batman side did not operate at all that year due to problems with the LIM motors on the vertical rollback. Even more unfortunate, in June 2006, the Chiller closed indefinitely following an incident on the Robin track. What happened was that the third car's wheel assembly of the train broke apart during the ride, further damaging the track and train. This kept the coaster closed for the rest of the season. Geez, that sounds a lot like your dumb who couldn't figure out how to drive a car without smacking into a pole. While they were planning to fix the damage, they also planned for some extensive modifications. Premier came in to make significant modifications for the upcoming off-season. This included a redesigned wheel assembly and the removal of the 0G roll. The latter was due to those inversions putting too much stress on the track. From what I heard, the rolls were tight and disorienting. However, the rolls were apparently too tight as they caused many problems. The trains could either get stuck or even crack a wheel, so they removed the 0G rolls to reduce stress and replaced them with simple S-bends. The Chiller did briefly open for the 2007 season, but the problem still prevailed. Heck, the Batman side never operated again after this. The Robin side, meanwhile, would be fully operational, even reusing Batman's old trains painted red to help run with a full train. But on June 28th, 2007, the Robin train cracked another wheel bogie. After this, the chiller remained closed that year. It seemed like one thing after another, issues would spot back on that prevented the coaster from running, proving more and more on how much of a flop it was. Coincidentally enough, the same could also be said about the movie it's based on. That film is basically two turds smashed together, as the film was hammered with negative reviews and declared a box office bomb. After years of constant downtime, maintenance issues, and disappointed guests, the chiller was declared far too expensive and complicated to fix. So during the 2007 season, the decision was made to permanently remove the chiller. Demolition began that year, and by 2008, the track was all gone. However, guests noticed how the track was carefully being cut and taken down, signifying it was getting relocated. Sure enough, the chiller was sent to a Brazilian theme park named Beto Caiado World. However, the chiller never actually opened there. After sitting in a New Jersey field for a bit, the track made it to Brazil in 2012, including just one train, as the other was sent to be used on Mr. Freeze. But the track sat in storage for 6 years before getting scrapped in 2018. It's unknown why Beto Caiado World never assembled it, but there are two theories. The first, and quite frankly more realistic theory, is that the park was too poor to open it. This wouldn't be a surprise, as from my research, Brazilian parks struggle to get new investments, and actually really good quality investments, not whatever the hell this piece of shit is. The second, more comical theory is that the park lost the ride's blueprints. Yeah, you heard that right, they allegedly lost the blueprints. I don't even know how that happened, if it happened. That's like your boss telling you to pick cottons like a slave, but you instead pull a D1 mission Black Ops style. And just like that, Batman and Robin the Chiller was cooked and given the boot. It's a shame too, because Six Flags really tried hard in the ride's final days to keep it running, and the Chiller would still be a great coaster if only it had operated as intended. But the complicated nature of the early LAMs, combined with the fact there were two tracks, this led to the Chiller only having a shitty 10-year run. And today, the Chiller is known as one of the biggest failures of all time. Today, the plot of land where the Chiller sat is now home to the Justice League Battle for Metropolis dark ride. As for Premier Rides, while the failure kicked them hard in the nuts, they are no worse for wear. Surprisingly enough, Six Flags continues to work with Premier. I mentioned they canceled the Mr. Freeze clone for Six Flags Great America, but they purchased two Flight of Fear clones for two of their parks in 1999. Poltergeist at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, and Joker's Jinx at Six Flags America. That is actually insane considering the screw over they brought in. They were willing to work with them again even though they fucked them over time and time again, and Premier has since shifted their focus into their LSM Skyrocket models. More recently, Premier built West Coast Racers for Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is a quasi-Mobius coaster where one track creates two racing experiences. This serves as an homage to the Chiller in a more reliable way. Plus, the Chiller still exists in some spirit. Remember the Mr. Freeze clones they bought in conjunction? They still exist today, so you can still ride them if you want to. However, only one other LAM shuttle loop would be built after this. And no, that one shuttle coaster in Indonesia doesn't count. It uses Premier's Skyrocket technology despite a very similar layout to Mr. Freeze. I'm referring to Speed the Ride at Las Vegas' Sahara Hotel. This Premier creation has a similar layout to Mr. Freeze, but instead features a vertical loop, overbank turns, and a second standard launch track. This would have been a great coaster to ride during the many times I've been to Vegas. I say would've because it's currently sitting in a storage lot on the south side of the strip. Funny enough, I have seen it in person the last time I was there in 2021, and it's been sitting there since 2012. So why has Speed the Ride sat in storage for over a decade? Well, that is a story for another day. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This video is part of my series where we dive into roller coasters and other amusement rides history and dynamics. Since you watched to the end, be a homie and click the like button because you clearly liked this episode, unless you're playing this in the background while playing Subway Surfers. Also, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Doing this convinces the YouTube algorithm to push this content to more viewers, especially since, for some reason, Great Adventure has an absurd amount of defunct coasters. For a park only 50 years old, they have more defunct coasters than most parks even have roller coasters, and most of them will be seen again, so stay tuned. Finally, watch these other great videos YouTube recommends. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.